Hello, I'm David Michael Smiggy, and I am a doctor. And for those of you who don't know, my wife has a brain tumor, and for those of you who might be finding out through some other method, she has a recurrent brain tumor. So some of you might know that about 3 years ago, she had her tumor removed, and then things went around pretty well afterwards. I mean, we had a baby who is now a year and a half old, and then about 3 weeks ago, Britta had a seizure at church, and from that seizure, we learned that her brain tumor has most definitely recurred at this point. There was some question of, hey, maybe this is just some old scar or something, but I think that was a kind of a pipe dream, but it's pretty obvious that her tumor has most definitely recurred. So we've gone back to Memphis, Tennessee to see our neurosurgeon who performed the first surgery, who kindly has offered to do a second surgery. I'm very grateful for him. If he ever watches this, 5 out of 5 would have brain surgery again with him. I guess as best you can. He's spectacular, and grateful for him. So we went ahead and met with him today, and the plan is to go after basically 3 areas of concern. The first area is kind of in front of the brain, towards where the first part was cut out. Probably not super valuable space, easy to probably take care of, hopefully, as long as it's not kind of crossing towards the other side of the brain. That can make things difficult or impossible to remove, but it looks like it likely is not at this point. Second area of concern is sort of midbrain, in the center of the brain. You don't need medical to realize that that's a pretty important spot, but the big question is whether or not that spot involves her motor function. If it does involve motor function, then we either have some very difficult decisions to make, or it may not be resectable at that point. And that certainly would be terrible, but from meeting with neurosurgery today, it seems like we can probably resect that portion. We will do some very special studies 2 days from now, the day before her surgery, to then find out if her motor tracks kind of go through that area of concern, and if they don't, great, we'll get rid of it. And if they do, like I said, we have decisions to make, and very likely would be unresectable at that point, but probably can resect it just from looking at it. More on that in 2 days. And the third area of concern is just kind of this leftover junk that's kind of, I mean, brain's not junk, but leftover area sort of on the bottom part of her sort of resection cavity from last time. So I think the odds of resection are good. Pretty good meeting with neurosurgery today. Very grateful to have them on board, grateful for the folks here, and overall hopeful and optimistic conversation. So that's kind of the immediate future in terms of what we're going to be doing in the next few days. Next question kind of comes up is, well, what about radiation and chemo? And usually that is, why didn't you do it the first time? And I'll tell you, because I wanted to have a baby, and also because when you do, the first time she had her cancer resected or tumor resected, was a total resection, and when you feel like you get all of it, or at least enough of it, you don't necessarily have to go straight to chemotherapy and radiation in the case of her tumor. Okay, every tumor is different, but in the case of a grade 2 oligodendroglioma, which is what she had, you can do kind of a watchful waiting approach, and that was appropriate to do. And unfortunately, it's back, and we will take care of it. So second time around, radiation chemo definitely on the menu in terms of likelihood things that we're going to be doing. Radiation, bad, but not all that bad. The real big question is going to be the chemotherapy. I don't know all the answers to it, but my suspicion is she'll probably be on chemotherapy for a while, or about a year or so, for what I'm reading about her tumor. Obviously, I'll defer to her tumor board and the neuro-oncologist that we'll see. But question comes with chemo is, any chemo you go on has a chance of giving you infertility. So we went ahead and met with a fertility person here and gave us a lot of insight into different options that we had. I think there's the obvious things like egg preservation, or embryo preservation, and then another interesting procedure where you can just remove an ovary and essentially put pieces of that back in after you're done with chemotherapy. And then a fourth option that I think is very reasonable is to basically give her a medication that protects fertility by sort of making your ovaries go dormant during the chemotherapy phase. So chemotherapy goes after very metabolically active cells. That's the idea. And interesting enough, cells that are making, eggs and sperm for that matter, are pretty active. So the idea in Britta's case, obviously, is to go and just sort of suppress ovarian function and say, hey, chill out for however long your chemo is, and then we'll try and stop this medication and then put you back on it. So for the medical people, I'll link you kind of the description of it below, I guess. But it's basically giving the patients a GnRH agonist. Something like leuprolide, for example, would be appropriate. So that is definitely something I did not consider prior to all this, and I think it's something that honestly I should consider for my patients who get chemo, especially if they're premenopausal. So anyway, things I'm learning. So that fortunately is an option as well. So overall, I think it was a good day in terms of kind of optimistic outlook on a lot of different things from different doctors. I know I tend to be more on the pessimistic, the world's ending, oh my goodness, dramatic spectrum. So I think it's grateful. I think it's good for me to hear from other doctors, and also to not be my wife's doctor. I think is probably the most important thing too. I just need to be her spouse. So. Yeah, I think that's kind of the big updates for now. So tomorrow we'll plan on getting tacos, I guess, because it's Tuesday. And then on Wednesday in the morning we'll get admitted, do basically a functional MRI looking for those motor tracks. And then on Thursday we'll cut and kind of go from there. Ways you can be praying, certainly we have the immediate kind of concerns. Surgery is always dangerous. There's always a lot of risks involved in surgery, especially brain surgery. Grateful for the surgeon that we have. You can pray for them. You can pray for Britta's recovery too from that surgery. I expect there to be some sort of residual deficits or weaknesses, certainly. Just in terms of recovery, I think her chances are pretty good, but just pray that she has a full recovery, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that we persevere through this together. Fertility questions down the road, certainly praying for those things too. Some people say, well, hey, can you adopt instead of going through all this? And unfortunately, the answer is probably no. If you go to a adoption agency and say, hey, well, they're usually going to ask you a question like, hey, what's your medical history like? I think it's fair for them to ask that, and I'll be honest and probably tell them, hey, my wife has a brain tumor. And you can imagine if they're looking for the best interests of the kid, they would probably consider not considering. They would probably stop considering you applying for them. It's a complicated issue. I know there are some places that are better than others. Certainly, maybe we do have an option of being a bit more pessimistic. Again, I told you, but for the most part, it's pretty difficult for especially brain tumor patients to be considered for being adoptive parents. So anyway, fertility, super important. Grateful for the kid I have too. I think the biggest prayer request I have is that parent doesn't grow up without his mom. You can just pray for that with me too. I think that's everything I have. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of this. I appreciate your love and support. Even though you might be a total stranger who picked up this video somehow, I appreciate you praying for me and my family. And appreciate basically all the people who've supported me in other different ways too. Grateful for all of you. So thank you very much. I'll keep you all posted.